It's been an incredibly busy time in Parliament this term, and I think it's important that we fill you in on what we've been busy with. Some of it is stuff you see. We've been quite involved with the budget process, from budget 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, but there are other things that have been taking place in the committee, particularly for myself. I thought it was important that I share some of those because there are implications in various ways for many of you out there who are the BOSA constituency, and many of you there who sent us abasithumile into Parliament. I want to first start by sharing some of the developments in the Small Business Development Committee. So in the Small Business Development Committee, we have been dealing with and engaged with a number of things, of which one of them is the Small Business Ombudsman. And so that is an important development, having an office that will engage with issues that small businesses raise, from the fairness of processes of awarding contracts to payments that are not paid or disbursed either on time or at all, to many other issues that small businesses face. It's a critical office. But what had happened is that in the process of the recruitment and shortlisting and ultimately the interviewing of the candidates, there were many things that played out which were quite concerning, particularly within the portfolio committee. And ultimately, as Build One South Africa, we lent our voice to giving a voice and to letting the public know what had happened in that process, and ultimately that process being returned back to the committee, or that report being returned back to the committee. So let me share with you a little bit of that. So in the process of recruiting for the Ombud, we as the committee were involved extensively, right from overseeing the process of the call for applications, to then those being received, to the shortlisting process, and ultimately the interviewing process. A lot of what went wrong happened on the day of interviewing, where we sat and I was part of that process. It was a 2-day process to interview those who had been shortlisted. And, there were some people on that list who did have a history of having been either accused of corruption or having been tainted in some way when it comes to corrupt behavior. These people were linked to the ANC. And there was particularly one candidate who really you could not ignore the extent to which they had been embroiled in or had allegations of misdemeanors or of corruption. And so this is something we flagged during the process. I flagged that issue during the process. Also asked the candidate, along with others in the portfolio committee, various questions about those allegations. That candidate, even as we asked, was protected, particularly by the chairperson, as we asked these questions. And there are numerous other issues that took place. It soon became quite clear that this particular candidate is the choice of the ANC, because other things took place, such as, for instance, him being scored by the chairperson more than what was actually available. Example, if there was 60 points available in total, he was scored 70 points, and this was by the chairperson of the committee. This was flagged by the secretariat, obviously, and dealt with and corrected. But it was just one of the issues that took place that were concerning, other than the protection of the candidate. The proceedings were also then not flighted, they were not broadcast as they were supposed to be, and that is something else that we questioned. There were also other issues that took place. A member of the ANC portfolio committee, who's an alternate member, being brought in to actually interview and score in that process, until we raised the fact that they actually can't score. So there are a number of issues which we flagged, and ultimately when this report was then compiled, these issues were left out of the report, and I raised this in Parliament in plenary when the report was brought to plenary to be adopted, so that the shortlisted candidates are then given to the minister. Just to explain, this candidate did appear on the shortlisted candidates And it was a candidate where we had raised various issues, but more than that, candidate aside, there are procedural issues which we had to flag. So I raised these procedural issues in plenary, in the House, along with other parties. Ultimately, opposition parties, actually including the DA, opposed or rejected the report, called for a division, which we were going to vote against the report, but the ANC then quickly intervened and asked that the reports actually just be taken back to the Small Business Development Portfolio Committee. And so the report is back in the Portfolio Committee, and we are awaiting a date at which we will once again review and updated or amended report. But ultimately, as Build One South Africa, what we want is for the whole process to be restarted. And now I get to the point. I want to tell you why. Because as small businesses in South Africa, there is a lot of unfairness. There is a lot of injustice that happens to small businesses in South Africa. But also there's just a lack of support for small businesses in South Africa. I always say that small businesses in South Africa are supposed to contribute 90% of new jobs by 2030, as per the NDP, the National Development Plan. But there just isn't enough support to let that happen or to make that happen. There is a lot of patronage that takes place, particularly when it comes to government programs, particularly when it comes to government funding and government contracts, where small businesses are experiencing that injustice and unfairness. And the Ombud has to be somebody who's completely impartial and will be able to make sure that small businesses are protected. It is the only way we ensure that this is a group or sector of society that not only has a place or an office or institution where their voice can be heard and their rights protected, but that we support small businesses in being able to contribute to South Africa's economy and growth. And so this is why we fight this in the way that we do, and this is why this is something that we certainly as Build One South Africa, and I certainly am going to be part of making sure is done in a way that has integrity and that best represents small businesses. Then the second, this week, we have been in the Trade and Industry Portfolio Committee, where the Minister and the National Lottery Commission Executive appeared before us as the Portfolio Committee on issues of the bid, which is currently all over the media, the awarding of the bid. And if you follow Build One South Africa and you follow some of our work and some of my work, you'll know that since August 2024, this is an issue which we have flagged, which we have championed when it comes to the awarding of this tender. And the reason we do this is multiple reasons. It's a 180 billion rand tender, the biggest in the country. But more than anything, for me, what's important about it is that how it is handled sets precedents for many of the institutions in trade and industry. It sets precedents and informs whether we are going to continue to allow a culture of state capture in this country, to allow a culture of patronage in this country. And so it's never about, and it has never been about, who ultimately wins or which bidder is ultimately the preferred bidder. It has always been about the process has got to be fair. It cannot be flawed as a matter of principle because of the extent and size of that tender, but also because we have really just got to be in an administration and in a parliament, the 7th parliament, that ensures that we are not continuing with the culture and with the precedents of state capture in this country. And so today we had the minister appear before us to answer on various issues. I raised a number of issues, but I think the most important that I want to share with you was that in this whole process, I'd written a letter in August of 2024, had written follow-up questions to the minister and raised them in Parliament. I'd raised these issues in the Portfolio Committee to the minister to say ultimately there are questions of conflict of interest, not with one bidder, with multiple bidders. Question was to say to the minister, could you release the names that sit on the evaluation and the adjudication committees? Because there are so many allegations of conflict of interest, and some that we know and we've seen. We've been in possession of these names of people who are associated with this bidder, with that bidder. And to ensure that the process is fair, you need to be able to release the names. If you yourself, Minister, are convinced that the process has been fair and that there's no conflict of interest. The Minister has given various reasons for not releasing or publishing this list of names. One of them was to protect the individuals. Now the process is finished. So we're saying the process is now complete. Surely you can now release the names. And initially when I asked in the portfolio committee whether the minister would release the names, he evaded the question. But eventually, after followed up and on more engagement with the minister has agreed to release the names of those who sit on the evaluation and the adjudication committees. And this is a victory. It is a win. Not only does the Constitution mandate that there's accountability and transparency, but more than anything, what's important is that the people of South Africa deserve to have accountability and transparency, and the voice of South Africans has got to be represented in Parliament. This is what people have wanted to see. This is what various stakeholders and civil society organizations have wanted to see. And if, in as much as the minister today, as well as the executive and board of the NLC, were so convinced that there was no conflict of interest, then surely let us be as convinced as well as South Africans. But ultimately is for South Africans to be assured that we are not in another era of state capture. What we want ultimately is for that national lottery to never be as captured as it was, to actually never be captured in the way that it was. There are still various SIU findings and investigations that point to an incredibly corrupt institution. And with this tender, the biggest in the country, you have to make sure that it is beyond reproach and that everything was above board. You want stakeholders and you want actually other bidders to actually be convinced of that. But more than anything, you want to make sure that there's a credibility of Parliament in their oversight role of ensuring that anything that has to do with public money, with the public purse, is protected, and that not just this minister, all ministers know that there won't simply be a rubber stamping that takes place in Parliament when it comes to the public purse. And for me, today is a victory because we have that commitment from the minister. We will follow it up, absolutely. But more than anything, this is the power of Parliament and this is the power of your voice. We are still here, still serving you. Like I always say, if you have any issue that you want to raise, in Webster at parliament.gov.za.